Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be in the 20th chapter in the book of Job. Here, and we hear for the second time from Zophar the Naamanite. We earlier heard him in the 11th chapter. This completes the three comforters, more accurately, antagonist counterparts of Job's second speeches. And for the neither the first nor the last time we hear a ballad of the witness, the three friends of Job, the three comforters, somewhat misleadingly named, introduced in the second chapter, 11th verse, those being Eliphaz the Naamanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. They all defend the same orthodoxy that insists that suffering is in proportion to it's always merited. So the earthly economy is reflective and mimics perfectly the heavenly economy. There is justice on earth inasmuch as there is a God in heaven who rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. Job's experience clearly invalidates of that premise, the premise of that suggestion. So what we have between them is an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. Job stubbornly maintains his insistency on his own innocence, whilst his friends toe the same party line and they defend it because if they are wrong, then what happened to Job can happen to them, and so that's why it becomes a lot more. The language becomes a lot more passionate and personal in the second round. And Zophar's ballad can be divided into three hearts. His description of the fate of the wicked. These ballads to the wicked are accumulated from observation. They contain a lot of platitudes and aphorisms, and they're not completely correct. They are eloquent and in touch, but not completely 100% truthful. And the 20th chapter consists of three parts. The first of which Zophar explains that life for the wicked is brief in verses 4 through 11. Then their pleasure is fleeting in verses 12 through 19. And finally, their death is painful in verses 20 through 29. We're going to cover the first range, the first 11. This is the end of a paragraph. But before we do that, as per custom, we're going to review what we most recently covered. We heard from Job's sixth speech in the 19th chapter. We divided that one in two. We took off from the 13th verse, and he just feels abandoned and forsaken by his brothers, his friends, his near ones, my close friends, the guest in my house, female servants. All of them he is estranged from. They don't want to look at him. They don't want to. They do not treat him with the dignity of respect they once allotted him. I have called my servant, but he gives no answer. I have to beg him with my mouth. So Joe's role was reversed. He was a master accustomed to commanding and control servants. Now he had to beg his own servant. So things are upside down in this topsy-turvy world that Job finds himself in. My spirit is strange to my wife. Now that is alternately translated as breath, the word spirit, breath, and they are etymologically derivative of the same Hebrew word ruah. And so his breath could have been a physical, he's emaciated. We read of his decrepit physical conditions. First off, he's covered head to toe with painful skin boils, but his breath is also offensive. He's skin and bones. He's just not healthy, not looking too good. And then even the children, he cannot command. His own children are gone. He had 10 of them, and they all died on the same day at the same instance. In a twinkle of an eye, the physical structure, an east wind blew down the structure and it collapsed on them. And and young children, he is not given the respect that young children ordinarily give to their elders. So he's accustomed to being respected and honored, and he was the greatest man in all of the East, and to suddenly lose that in a twinkle of an eye was torturous, to say the least. All my intimate friends loathe me, and those whom I love have turned against me. So the people who mean most to him, he doesn't mean a whole lot to them. The intimate friends, these are the best friends, his closest companion. These three friends, these comforters, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were former friends of him, but they seem fair weather friends. They are friendly to him when things are prosperous, when things are successful, when he is well, and they are all healthy, wealthy, and wise, and so their reputations are invested in their line of defense of the argument. But Job just talks about his bone clinging to my skin and flesh. I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. He feels at death's door, and he is physically emaciated, and But then he launches from a transformation of expressions of despair to expressions of hope in concrete positive expectations. Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, engraved on a rock with an iron pen in lead forever. So Job, he has no children, and the natural man has a longing and a quest for immortality. And one of the ways we immortalize ourselves is by writing, so that our posterity has a record to read some of the things about us, some of the musings of our mind. And Job wants he wants it engraved in statues and in three-dimensional artifice artwork. So he wants an annal to be kept of him. He got part of his wish. We don't know who wrote the book of Job, but it almost certainly wasn't Job. Whoever it was did it before Moses. But for I know that my Redeemer lives, and to the end shall stand over the earth. The Redeemer, he earlier speaks of a mediator and heavenly witness. So these are messianic allusions. A Redeemer in the ancient world was one who protected the family. They could avenge the blood of a brother, restore his property. Every family had a redeemer. You can read the book of Ruth for more on the most on the concept of redeemer, and the redeemer of our lives unto eternity. And the resurrection is none other than the Messiah, and he will return and stand over the earth in the millennial dispensation which awaits us for 1,000 years. The rule of the earth will return to its control of its rightful owner and creator. And after my skin has been struck off, then in my flesh I shall see Eloah. This is a reference to the resurrection. He's talking about, in my flesh I shall see Eloah. So the resurrection is not a spiritual one, but a physical one and a literal one. The Old Testament is the resurrection really divided the sand between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees affirmed it, the Sadducees denied it. And when the Messiah indicts their own doctrinal error by using the writings of Moses, which the Sadducees they only affirm the writings of Moses as canonical, but he quotes Exodus 6:3 with the implicit inference that the patriarchs are still living and in his presence when he introduces himself as the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Whom I myself shall see on my side, and not a stranger. My kidneys have failed within me. So he has faith that he will visibly behold him, and he will not be estranged. He has faith that all rights will be wronged in heaven, and he is longing for his day in court. He has concrete confidence that he will be vindicated in the judgment of Elohim, who knows that he has not sinned. What Job can't quite figure out is why has he visited this calamity upon him. And he was wrong to think that it was the sovereign permission of Elohim which permitted Satan to inflict the devastating calamities on him. But he has faith that even though he's estranged from all his friends, families, loved ones, employees, close ones, people who once trusted him and had affection for him, he has the concrete certainty that he is a friend in all times and in all needs. And so do we. 20th chapter, first verse. Then Zophar the Naamanite answered and said, so same thing I do every time I read the introductory verse, what would you say if you were in his shoes? Based on what we already read and covered from Job, he is abandoned and forsaken, he is bereft of any friend on earth, so he is looking at heaven, and that is his state of predicament. Zophar is not as charitable as we would like to think we would be in that situation. Truly my thoughts make me respond, even because of my haste within me. So his mind is running at 60 miles an hour, a mile a minute. There's just fast-paced pace. He's stimulated by thought. This discussion has his mind going, and he has to respond. He's compelled to by this overwhelming compulsion and the haste within me. He cannot say it fast enough. He cannot hold his tongue for much longer. What he has to say, there's a sense of urgency about what he has to say. I have listened to the reproof which insults me, and the spirit of my understanding makes me answer. So we learn two things, that he's taking it personal. He takes Job's musings as personal affronts, and I think it's a sign of weakness to take any criticism or insults personally. Whenever someone criticizes me or speaks negatively about me, I ask myself, is there any character flaw they're exposing or something wrong with me? And I try not to take the fact that it's directed at me too personally. But the other thing we learn is that he fancies himself as a man of wisdom. He has this great understanding. Job should be bowing before the supremacy of his wisdom, because what he has to say is true. Everything he's observed, everything he's read, everything he's taught, everything he believes convinces him of the argument that suffering is the response of sin, and the extent to which we suffer is the extent to which we sin. And the book of Job falls into the genre and category of a theodicy, which explores and explains the relationship of the righteous to suffering. Why do the righteous suffer? And we are all but guaranteed that if we are living a righteous life in 2 Timothy 3:12, we can expect persecution. You have known this of old, since man was placed on the earth. He's taking it way back to the primordial beginnings, the antediluvian, the Adam and Eden, essentially. And he's saying, Job, you know this is true. This is what we've been taught. This is what we've been groomed. And Job, in all likelihood, would have been conditioned by the same theological outlook, because he had been righteous and rewarded, but he got it taken away to enhance his righteousness, and he got his reward restored twofold. But the same principle he's about to espouse has been a law in motion and in effect since the foundation of the earth, since human beings have inhabited it. That the singing of the wicked is short-lived, and the joy of the defiled one is but for a moment. So we read the two things that I broke down the ballad into, the ballad of the wicked. The first two is the life is brief and that pleasure is fleeting. So the singing, they're not going to be alive for much long. They're not going to have a song to sing on their tongue, because there will be no life behind that tongue. And the longevity of life is not an accurate barometer of how well we have lived. It's far too simplistic an explanation. Many wicked people die prematurely because they're consumed with narcotics and sex addictions and sexual peccadillos, which take away from the life, and they lead unhealthy lives. So health is a sign of spirituality. Human nature exists in Trinity. We have minds, we have souls, we have hearts, and we have spirits. Eliminate minds from that trio. So we have we have to fulfill all elements in order to be happy, healthy, and whole. So bodily exercise profiteth littleth, we read in one of the Timothys, but we should still maintain a health as a principle and a rule, because this life is not guaranteed, and the fact is that many godless people live enviably long lives, but their joy is temporary, it's fleeting, it's the immediate gratification is gone in almost in an instant. It's a flower fading in a field, and it is a vanish in a flicker in eternity. It's there one day and then it is gone, seemingly forever. So the wages of wickedness does not pay. It does not add a qualitative enhancement to your life, nor a quantitative one. Strictly speaking, the life of wicked will have adverse health consequences, but so too, the righteous are not immune from sickness and decay and premature death. Although his pride mounts up to the heavens and his head reaches to the clouds, this reminds us of the constructors of the Tower at Babel, as described in Genesis 11:6. It was their pride which compelled them to build a mountain all the way to the heavens. They wanted to reach the heavens and touch the sky, and so they could be on an equal playing field with God. And it was rooted and motivated by human pride. The pride is the same sin which compelled Lucifer to aspire after he says, I will ascend on the utmost of the mounts. I will rise I will be like the Most High, but you are brought down to the grave. So the sin of Babel was the sin of Lucifer, the sin of pride. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins, and it has deleterious consequences, mental, emotional, and often physical. Um, but the proud, they exalt themselves in their imagination. They have an exaggerated sense of self-entitlement that is not perceived flatteringly or positively wherever they go. He perishes forever like his own dung. Those who have seen him say, "Where is he?" So death lasts forever, and the same that's true with the wicked as with the righteous. Anyone who dies, you are dead forever. There's no coming back. There is an afterlife in the resurrection, but you have to make it there. So death is a democracy, but salvation is an aristocracy. And dung would have been an unflattering image of something that was useless, worthless, just defiled, polluted, diseased. No good could come from dung, or a comparison to that is never flattering. And, he's there one day and then he's not, and when he's not, he's no longer there. So those we'll see and say, "Where is he?" And eventually they'll stop asking, because his memory, the memory of the wicked, will recede, because they will not have a legacy testament to their wickedness. According to his simplistic, archaic theology, people will be speaking of, I personally don't think we have a whole lot time left of human history, but people are still speaking of tyrants of the ancient world. He flies away like a dream and is not found. He is driven away like a vision of the night. A dream and a vision of the night, we heard that word earlier in Eliphaz's 4th chapter. He claimed to be visited by a vision of the night, which gave him this exalted, esteemed revelation of truth that just wasn't applicable to Job's situation. But dreams, they come and go. They're here for, they seem so real, and then you wake up. And I honestly have a great difficulty remembering dreams, but I'm told that we dream even though we don't remember them. So dreaming is part of sleeping, and it's a different strata of consciousness. So, the fact that dreams, that Elohim spoke to people through dreams in the Bible, it's still the biblical position on the efficacy of dreams of revelation is far from univocal. Jeremiah speaks of the misleading dreams of the false prophets, and Solomon, who himself was visited by a theophanic manifestation in his dream, which imparted him his not only his wisdom but his wealth and his prestige. In 1 Kings 3 and 2 Chronicles 1, speaks somewhat dismissingly of them in Ecclesiastes 5:3. But the point of this passage in the verse is that, the life and the pleasure of the wicked vanishes as quickly as a dream. So there is pleasure in sin for a season. You can get away with it for a little while, but eventually time's out and runs out, and that's it. You had your fun, you had your last laugh. Now the time's you're going to be laughed at. Eyes that saw him do so no more, nor does his place see him anymore. So the people who are still living and walking the earth, once they're gone, they're not going to see him. He's not going to be alive and in their midst, walking and living and talking and breathing. So there's an element of finality once you're dead, and the wicked are expected to die young, according to Zophar's overly simplistic theological prism, very black and white. It allows no area for grays. Job's experience so clearly and in every way invalidates the premise not only of his own suggestion, but the same theological orthodoxy that is defended by Eliphaz and Bildad. His sons seek the favor of the poor, and his hands give back his wealth. So that your children would end up in poverty and begging even from the poor when you were once rich is just the worst possible scenario of outcome that could possibly happen to someone in Job's. So of course, his children were dead, but the wicked, ill-gotten, stolen wealth does not lash. It has wings and it vanishes, and rightly so. So it is not an enduring foundation the pursuit of ill-gotten and wickedly acquired wealth. It's not going to last with you, and even if you die with it, you can't take any of it with it. Naked I came into the earth, and naked I shall return, as Job makes plain in chapter 1, verse 21, landmark verse of this book. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. Even after all the calamity which hits him, he thinks to bless rather than curse the one who he feels accursed by, but it's not exactly him who's doing it. He's allowing it to happen for his growth and betterment. His bones filled with his youth, lie down with him in the dust. So, your youth, that dies even before you die, but the implicit assumption is that the wicked are not even going to live long enough to be able to look back on their youth. So their bones are going to be filled with their youth. They're going to die young because they lived wickedly. And were punished accordingly, because according to Zophar's simplistic prison, there is the earthly justice is a perfect reflection of heavenly justice. So if you are suffering on the earth, it is because you deserve to suffer. That is far too simplistic an explanation for the reason of the suffering. Why do the righteous suffer? So it's almost it stretches the imagination. These three men are living almost on a theological fairy tale. They were righteous, they were wise, they were self-righteous, certainly. Look at them attacking Job with baseless and groundless accusations with no standing in fact. But they had a fairy tale life, and if it could happen to Job, it could happen to them, and that's why they're defending so vigorously their orthodoxy. 11th, that's the final one. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. We'll pick this up sometime later, and remember the two things we have to cover. He already mentioned something about the pleasure of the wicked being fleeting, but he elaborates on that more fully from the 12th to the 19th verse, and then he describes the fate of the wicked as dying a painful death in verses 20 through 29. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.